Before we get started, just a reminder of my book club Submissive and Readables Instagram page. Link in the description down below. Please give it a follow. We are trying very, very hard to beat Reese Witherspoon. We want our stickers on books. We want to executive produce our adaptations. And we can only get there with your guys' help. Anyway, welcome to part 2 of the books that I read as a kid. This wasn't meant to be a series, but after recording the first video, I realized that there were a lot that I forgot to talk about. And I also asked you guys for some suggestions, some books that you read as a kid that we're going to incorporate into this as well. And I'm going to start by doing a little follow-up on last time, just because a few interesting things I found. One is photo evidence of me being a huge Captain Underpants fan, I believe. I also found a grade 7 book report I did on the Hunger Games, and this thing is an absolute disaster. I mean, I did pretty good in school, especially like during this time, so I imagine I got a good score on it, but good lord, 7th graders are dumb. What on earth was... And as for all those books I talked about, it seems like there were a bunch of you who also have fond memories of them, so that was lovely to see. Beyond Eternity loved Goosebumps. Epic, awesome, fantastic. Giving a bit of shit to my boy Bill here though. Now listen, I do think that there is a lot of value to get out of Shakespeare's works, both, from a historical context and also, just some pretty genuinely good stories that he crafted. But at the same time, I fully understand why a 14-year-old kid would absolutely hate him. Because I did. No child wants to be forced to read A Midsummer Night's Dream. There isn't a single middle schooler on the planet who will say this. I feel like Shakespeare might be better just left for people who, want to seek him out. Because being a child trying to decipher his, extremely ancient style of English just was not fun. But nowadays, I do tend to think that Shakespeare was pretty based. I mean, just by influence alone, he's probably one of the greatest artists to have ever lived. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Now, I never actually have read a Roald Dahl book before. They're super popular to this day, super popular. I've seen a ton of the movies they made based on them. And this is relevant, actually, because next month, my book club, we're actually doing a special event. It's going to be Roald Dahl month, where each week we are going to be reading one of his classic books. So, being an adult, I don't know how much they will appeal to me, but I think it will be a fun little palate cleanse, and as long as he doesn't mention his thoughts on Jewish people, I'm sure they will be delightful romps. Now, as I sort of expected, you guys mentioned a lot of books that I was not super familiar with. Beck mentions Airborne. I don't know what that is. Redwall. I don't know. Magic. I did read Magic Treehouse. That's like a baby book though. Inkheart, Septimus Heap Chronicles, Del Toro Quest. I don't know if I was living under a rock. With a lot of these, I don't know much about. I know Inkheart had that Brendan Fraser movie or something. It was like an isekai. I don't know. Sort of a follow-up. We're gonna go back to talking about Margaret Peterson Haddix, of course, the writer of the Shadow Children series, which I talked about last time. She had also contributed to the 39 Clues. But there was another series she wrote that I did dip my toes into a little bit, and I can't believe I forgot to mention it because it was absolutely absurd, and that was The Missing, specifically the first book, Found. I think I read a few more or something. I don't really remember them well, other than just how I don't know how you come up with this stuff, man. It was about a group of children who discovered that they were missing historical figures. What happened is that, at the point in time where these historical figures disappeared, some bad guys showed up with a time machine, brought them to the present day, and then turned them into babies. And now those babies grow up in the present day as other people. I think this might have been too weird for me as a kid. Honestly, I think that's why I didn't really vibe with this series. Well, it was either that or more. I was probably expecting something closer to the Shadow Children, but this was just like a really wacky sci-fi story. They ended up making like 10 of these or something. I don't know if anyone else has read them, but yeah, just a really, really weird one. At the very end of last video, I mentioned The Day My Butt Went Psycho. This was from author Andy Griffiths, not Andy Griffith, Andy Griffiths, who was an Australian author who was also very, very popular in Canada. I don't really know how he was received in other countries because I don't really ever see people talk about his stuff. But yeah, he was a comedy writer. He had a lot of really, really absurd and silly books written for kids, which I used to find absolutely hilarious. But he also had his epic magnum opus, The Butt Wars Saga, which was a trilogy about I believe people's asses, like, detaching themselves and, like, revolting. At one point they go to space, at one point they time travel. I don't remember much about it, but I really, really loved them. It's gotten a TV show in recent years, which looks absolutely atrocious. So I don't know if my taste was just horrible when I was like 10. But yeah, I also doubt it does the book's justice. So I followed this author for a while. He had another series coming out around this time. It was called Schooling Around, and I don't remember much about it other than it just, being his normal style of silly humor, and this one it took place in a school, and they all had wacky teachers and stuff. I enjoyed that one too, and it sort of reminded me of a bit of a trend we saw with children's books, and probably still do. And it was made apparent to me by some of your guys' suggestions here. Chair here brings up My Weird School, and we have Zach bringing up Wayside. You see, kids hate school, so what a lot of children's authors do is, make a fun school for them to visit. It was always great escapism when a kid could come home from a crappy day at school and just dive into one of these books and have a good time. I never read Wayside. I did see the cartoon a bunch when that was coming on, but I didn't actually know it was written by the author of Holes. Holes was an absolute banger, man. We did Holes, I believe, in grade 6, and Pipsy here does not like it, man. And I gotta say, that's too damn bad! Yeah, probably more iconic than Holes the book is Holes the movie, which to this day might still be the most faithful adaptation of a book I have ever seen. But yeah, definitely a classic. And another classic, of course, is Bone, a fantasy comic about these little silly bone creatures, journeying through a land that is strange to them. And what starts as, a rather goofy adventure story with a lot of colorful characters quickly evolves into a rather epic fantasy saga which had a lot of stakes, a lot of action and drama, but still had that lighthearted tone to appeal to kids. Now, this comic was originally serialized throughout the 90s and early 2000s, and it actually, long ended when I first got into it, but at that point that I did, they were actually doing a re-edition of the comic in these, full color volumes, and so I was reading them as they were coming out, and what a time. Like Captain Underpants, Bone was really something that got me interested in the medium, and probably one of the reasons I still draw comics to this day. I plan to give it a reread soon, actually, because I have heard it holds up pretty well, and I have most of the volumes here. Also, I'm still very rotted that Netflix canceled the show. Man, are the stupid Telltale games really going to be the only Bone adaptation we ever get? It doesn't feel right, man. Now, last time I talked about my mother reading the Harry Potter books to me as I was a child, and eventually as they were coming out. But of course, those books sometimes took a while to come out. So in the meantime, we went through the Chronicles of Narnia. These never really clicked with me as a kid. They just straight up didn't. I don't even know why I'm mentioning it here. I just want to, Narnia was a thing. I did read the Narnia books as a kid. Did not care for them. It might have been like the weird way they were done. Like, I know, like, the reading them in its proper order is not the chronological way, so maybe I just found them a bit confusing. Massive, influential fantasy series. Maybe if I went back to it today, I would, get it. I wanted to mention it for that reason, but yeah, was never really my thing. And didn't particularly care for the films either. I remember really liking the first 39 Clues book, and the book where the guy would summon this gargoyle genie thing. I forgot the name. Oh boy, do I have you covered. The Bartimaeus sequence. Oh yeah, baby. Also mentioned by Florida's #1 Dowboy Stan. Yes, this was a series about a kid who trains to become a magician and also summons a djinn to do stuff for him. It's been a while. The plot's rusty. But this was a notable series because it was a chore. And I don't necessarily mean it as I thought the series was bad. I don't know, I was a kid. But I think in retrospect, the biggest problem I had with this series was I read it a bit too early. Reading up on it now, it seems like that this series was definitely a lot more mature than your typical middle grade fantasy. You had multiple split POVs following a whole bunch of different characters. There were a lot of politics, a lot of, morally complex themes. And I think for, a kid at a specific age, maybe like 11 or 12, this could be really interesting. But I think I was closer to like 9 when I first read these. I remember I got the box set of the trilogy for Christmas. And yeah, I remember being intrigued by it, but I just had a really hard time as a kid just focusing on it. So yeah, maybe those books were meant for a bit of an older audience than I was at the time, but I am glad to see that other people have fond memories of them. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we had the Spiderwick Chronicles. And I say that because these were very, very short and breezy reads. It was like the story of these kids who, find out they're living in this magical forest or something, and there's this evil goblin king. Again, a bit rusty on some of these books, but I did greatly enjoy these ones as well. I think this was around the time that the movie had come out, so the franchise was getting a big spotlight. I jumped on the bandwagon, really, really enjoyed it. There was a sequel series too, which I think I had started. Don't know if I ever finished it. Yeah, just really fun, lots of imagination. Sort of the idea that, this ordinary world you live in could have this other side to it. It's a trope that's been done to death, but for good reason. And because of that, I sought out some books that were a bit more like it. And I discovered the Grey Griffins series. This might be the most obscure thing I'm talking about here. I don't think I've ever seen another living soul mention this one, but I really, really enjoyed it when I was younger. It was about this group of friends who played like D&D or something, but then they realized that, oh, the game that they're playing is real. If you're saying, well, that's Stranger Things, you're probably right. The Duffer Brothers and their hush money is probably why no one has heard of this one. Anyway, then it was like a whole thing with like the Templar Knights and like the demons, and it was pretty wild if I remember correctly. But yeah, it was a ton of fun, and again, it had a lot of great creativity and imagination. And now the moment you've all been waiting for, of course, City of Bones. City of Bones! It's Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I cannot believe I left this one out of the first video. This was one of the absolute highlights of my childhood. From the very first day my mom brought this book home to me, I was absolutely enthralled by Greg Heffley's journey through middle school. I was very into comics at the time, stuff like Captain Underpants, then Bone, but Diary of a Wimpy Kid was sort of like that, but presented in a different style. It was this kid's journal written in the first person. He was talking about his day, all the struggles that he goes through as a middle school student, with his, goofy, crude drawings thrown in there for comedic effect. And it was a great comedic effect, let me tell you. Because these books were absolutely hysterical. So many great iconic moments in this one. And literally everyone still remembers them. They still remember the cheese touch, loaded diaper, Zooey Mama. But they also had good messages too. I mean, Greg was not a likable guy, and he always gets what he has coming to him. And his themes of friendship and forgiveness always gave the books a bit of a wholesome touch. Jeff Kinney really knew his stuff. And he really left an impact on millions and millions of kids. And he is still doing so, as the 17th installment just came out last year. Again, it's the sort of thing where I'm very envious of kids today who are getting into this series, because, at the time, I'm pretty sure literally I started reading this when the first book came out, and I think I had only read like the first 5 or 6, and I read them. My copies were absolutely destroyed. But yeah, the live action movies were also coming out during this time. Those were an absolute riot as well. Now, while I say I'm envious of the kids, because of the books that still continue to come out, not so much on the media side, because you had like that other live action one, which we don't speak about. We got these new animated ones coming out, which are absolutely horrendous. I don't know what happened here. When they first teased them, they had this really nice style, sort of reminiscent of the Peanuts movie. But at one point, it seems like their budget got like slashed to pieces, and we got this crap instead. And it seems like they might be churning one out annually for the rest of time. I don't know, man, but it is what it is. And Diary of a Wimpy Kid will absolutely go down in history as one of the most iconic children's books of all time. So yeah, Zooey Mama, everyone. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment down below. We're doing Lord of the Rings next. I'll see you then.